3,000 kilometers beneath the soft loam, the sprawling forests and the restless tectonic plates that define the surface of the world, the illusion of Earth as a nurturing sentient mother dissolves into the reality of a blind and unfeeling engine. At this depth, the familiar world of sunlight and biology is replaced by a kingdom of crushing gravity and eternal, incandescent darkness. This is the outer core, a vast subterranean sea of molten iron and nickel that encompasses a volume larger than the planet Mars. Here, the pressure is so immense, exceeding 3 million times the atmospheric weight at sea level, that the very atoms of metal are squeezed into a state of fluid ferocity. The temperatures in this lightless abyss rival the 6,000 degrees found at the visible surface of the Sun, yet this heat does not radiate into space. It is trapped, churning within a planetary furnace that has been cooling for over 4 billion years. This is the geodynamo, a colossal mechanical heart that beats not with blood, but with the relentless flow of liquid metal. It is a machine fueled by two primary sources of energy, both indifferent to the life they inadvertently sustain. The first is the primordial heat left over from the violent birth of the planet, the kinetic energy of 1,000 worlds colliding, now slowly leaking outward toward the cold vacuum of the void. The second is the slow, silent decay of radioactive elements, uranium, thorium, and potassium, locked deep within the planetary chassis since its formation. This radioactive breakdown provides a steady, invisible fire that prevents the core from freezing solid, maintaining the liquid state of the iron ocean and ensuring that the gears of the planetary engine continue to turn. Within this metallic sea, the laws of thermodynamics dictate a cycle of perpetual motion. The inner core, a solid sphere of crystalline iron the size of the moon, sits at the very centre of the world, glowing with a heat so intense it defies the crushing weight of the entire planet. This inner furnace heats the surrounding liquid of the outer core, causing the molten iron to become less dense and rise in massive searing plumes toward the mantle. As this liquid metal ascends, it cools, grows heavy, and eventually sinks back down toward the centre, creating vast convection currents that span thousands of kilometres. This is not a gentle stirring. It is a violent, churning process where rivers of iron flow with the momentum of entire continents, driven by the inescapable necessity of heat seeking an exit. As these rivers of metal rise and fall, they do not move in simple straight lines. The rotation of the Earth exerts a relentless force upon them, twisting the rising plumes into tight vertical spirals that resemble massive golden columns of liquid fire. These spinning pillars of metal act as the coils of a titanic generator. Through the principles of electromagnetism, the motion of this conducting fluid through a pre-existing faint magnetic field induces electric currents of staggering magnitude. These currents in turn generate a new, much more powerful magnetic field, creating a self-sustaining feedback loop that has persisted for eons. This is the origin of the magnetosphere, not a divine shield or a gift from a benevolent creator, but a physical byproduct of a cooling planet, an accidental effluence of a massive unfeeling machine. This invisible architecture of magnetic force lines stretches far beyond the atmosphere, reaching tens of thousands of kilometers into the dark reaches of space. It forms a protective cocoon, a teardrop-shaped envelope that deflects the relentless bombardment of the solar wind. Without this shield, the high-energy particles streaming from the sun would sandblast the atmosphere into the vacuum, stripping away the water and oxygen that allow the thin film of biology on the surface to exist. Yet, the geodynamo does not know it is protecting anything. It does not care for the survival of the forests, the oceans, or the civilizations that have built their cities upon the crust. It is a blind servant to the laws of entropy, a mechanical process that will continue only as long as there is heat to move the metal and gravity to pull it down. The sheer scale of this subterranean furnace is a testament to the indifference of the cosmos. In the lightless depths of the outer core, there is no concept of time as humans understand it, only the slow, agonizingly long cycles of cooling and the steady decay of atoms. The pressure is so great that it would instantly liquefy any vessel humanity could hope to build. Yet it is this very pressure, that keeps the inner core solid despite the temperatures that should melt it. This delicate, terrifying balance of forces is the only reason the surface remains habitable. We live in a brief window of planetary history, a momentary epoch where the core is still hot enough to churn but not yet cold enough to stop. The magnetic field is the breath of this machine, a shimmering ghost of energy that reveals the state of the engine hidden beneath. It is a shield born of friction, heat, and the spinning of a metal sea. To look upon the magnetic field as a constant is a human fallacy. It is as fluid and temperamental as the iron rivers that create it. The universe does not care if the engine stalls or if the shield fails. It simply follows the path of least resistance, moving toward a state of total equilibrium where all heat is spent and all motion ceases. We are passengers on a vessel whose engine room is a 3,000-kilometre deep abyss of liquid fire, a place where the laws of physics are the only masters, and where the survival of life is merely a statistical anomaly in the operation of a cold, mechanical world. High above the churning metallic tides of the core, in the silent, airless reaches of low Earth orbit, a different kind of machine keeps a vigilant watch. This is the integrated interplanetary ionospheric atlas, a constellation of hundreds of silver sentinels known to the scientific community as the 3-Eye Atlas. If the geodynamo is the blind heart of the planet, then this multinational network is its newly awakened nervous system. It consists of swarms of small, highly specialized satellites that move in intricate choreographed patterns, weaving a web of silicon and gold around the globe. Each craft is equipped with magnetometer booms that extend like delicate antennae into the void, sensitive enough to detect the displacement of a single electron by the influence of the magnetic field. These instruments do not merely see the world, they feel the invisible architecture of the magnetosphere, the gossamer threads of force that wrap around the Earth in a protective embrace. The 3-Eye Atlas does not work alone. Its orbital eyes are linked to a subterranean network of deep-crust seismic sensors and superconducting quantum interference devices buried deep within the bedrock of every continent. These terrestrial outposts listen to the low-frequency hum of the planet, the infrasonic vibrations caused by the movement of the molten iron 3,000 kilometers below. Together, the satellites and the ground stations create a real-time, four-dimensional map of the Earth's magnetic breath. On the flickering screens of data centers in Geneva, Tokyo, and Houston, the magnetosphere is revealed not as a static shield, but as a dynamic, shimmering tapestry. It pulses and stretches, reacting to the ebb and flow of the solar wind, its flux ropes twisting and snapping like whipcord as they redirect the onslaught of cosmic radiation. For decades, this map remained relatively stable, a predictable record of a healthy planetary engine. But in the final weeks of the most recent December, the data began to change. The tension in the monitoring rooms became palpable as the 3-Eye Atlas started to record a series of unprecedented anomalies. The invisible lines of force, which usually flow in smooth, elegant arcs from pole to pole, began to fray and tangle. In certain regions, the magnetic intensity did not merely fluctuate, it plummeted. The sensors, designed with the highest precision human engineering can achieve, began to flag a drop in field strength of 10% within the span of a single month. This was not the slow, geological drift that scientists had expected. It was a sudden, violent spasm in the planetary armour. The contrast between the technology used to measure these events and the events themselves is profound. On one side are the delicate circuits of the satellites, powered by thin films of solar cells and coordinated by algorithms that calculate positions to the millimetre. These are the pinnacle of human achievement, fragile constructs of glass and copper that exist only because the environment around them has been stable for thousands of years. On the other side is the geodynamo, a gargantuan, indifferent force of nature that possesses more kinetic energy than every nuclear weapon ever built. The 3-Eye Atlas is like a butterfly resting on the piston of a steam engine, its tiny sensors recording the first signs that the massive iron gears are beginning to grind and stall. In the quiet halls of the mission control centers, the scientists watch the data streams with a growing sense of clinical dread. They see the North Magnetic Pole, which had already been wandering towards Siberia at a rate of 55 kilometers per year, suddenly lurch forward with renewed momentum. They observe the South Atlantic anomaly, a known weak point in the field, expanding like a tear in a sail. The real-time mapping shows the dipole, the clean north-south orientation of the planet, starting to break down into a chaotic multi-pole arrangement. It is as if the Earth's magnetic identity is dissolving, the singular voice of the geodynamo breaking into a discordant cacophony of competing magnetic eddies. This information is processed through supercomputers that run simulations of the core's fluid dynamics, and the results are consistently grim. The anomalies recorded by the 3i Atlas suggest that the convection currents in the outer core are losing their coherence. The vertical columns of liquid iron, twisted into shape by the rotation of the planet, are beginning to wobble and break apart. The engine is not merely shifting gears, it is experiencing a fundamental failure of its internal geometry. The satellites detect the ripples of this failure as they propagate upward through the mantle and into the sky, recording the weakening of the shield in high definition. The scientists are no longer just observers of a natural phenomenon, they are witnesses to a planetary transition. The 3i Atlas provides a window into the cold, mathematical inevitability of the cooling core. It reveals that the protection we take for granted is a fleeting state of affairs, a temporary equilibrium in a universe that tends toward disorder. The data points do not lie. They tell the story of a world whose primary defense is thinning, leaving the atmosphere vulnerable to the relentless pressure of the sun. The silence in the data centers is the silence of a species realizing that the ground beneath them and the sky above them are both governed by a machine that is slowly running out of time. As the December data continues to spike, the realization takes hold. The engine is stalling, and there is no way for the tiny, delicate hands of humanity to reach down into the fire and restart the gears. The rotation of the planet, a steady and relentless spin at the equator of over 1,600 kilometers per hour, imparts a secondary motion to the rising plumes of iron. This is the Coriolis effect, a phantom hand that reaches into the depths to twist the upward flow of molten metal. As the searing liquid rises from the boundary of the solid inner core, the rotation of the Earth deflects its path, forcing the iron into tight vertical vortices. These are the pillars of the geodynamo, thousands of kilometers in height, spinning with a mechanical precision dictated by the conservation of angular momentum. They are the structural coils of the planetary engine, organized into vast parallel columns that align with the axis of the Earth's rotation. In this lightless subterranean factory, the motion of the fluid becomes the architect of force. Because the liquid iron is a highly conductive metal, its passage through the existing faint magnetic field lines induces powerful electric currents. This is the principle of the self-exciting dynamo. The movement of a conductor through a magnetic field creates electricity, and that electricity, in turn, reinforces and amplifies the magnetic field. It is a closed, self-sustaining loop of electromagnetism where kinetic energy is transformed into a global shield. The columns of liquid iron act as the armatures of a gargantuan generator, their collective rotation forging a coherent magnetic structure that reaches out from the core through the mantle and into the heavens. This organized chaos gives birth to the dipole, the elegant north and south orientation that provides a sense of order to the chaotic interior. The alignment of the spinning iron pillars ensures that the magnetic field lines emerge from one hemisphere and return through the other, creating a stable, two-pole geometry. This dipole is the primary component of our planetary armour, a predictable and steady force that has guided the migration of birds and the needles of human compasses for centuries. It is the signature of a well-ordered engine, a sign that the convection currents are moving in the rhythmic, synchronized patterns required to maintain the shield. However, this stability is not a permanent feature of the Earth. It is a temporary equilibrium, a delicate balance of forces that has persisted for eons, but remains entirely subject to the fluid dynamics of a cooling world. The strength and orientation of the dipole depend on the vigor of the convection and the speed of the planet's rotation. If the heat flux from the inner core diminishes, or if the internal flow of the iron becomes turbulent and disorganized, the dipole begins to waver. The columns of liquid metal are not rigid structures. They are fluidic ghosts, susceptible to the slightest change in temperature or pressure. When the symmetry of these columns is disrupted, the magnetic field does not simply vanish, it fractures. The engine operates within a narrow window of physical parameters. For the geodynamo to function, the temperature difference between the top and the bottom of the outer core must be sufficient to drive the iron upward against the crushing weight of gravity. As the planet slowly sheds its primordial heat into the cold sink of space, this temperature gradient inevitably softens. The liquid metal ocean grows sluggish, the convection currents lose their drive, and the Coriolis force has less material to twist into the necessary spirals. The self-sustaining loop begins to fray as the electricity generated by the slower moving iron is no longer enough to maintain the intensity of the field. This is the mechanical reality of the world beneath our feet. The magnetic field is a symptom of a massive churning heat engine that is slowly, inevitably running out of fuel. The equilibrium we perceive as a constant is merely a long-duration event in the grand timeline of planetary cooling. The iron columns that forge our shield are part of a system that is moving toward a state of total rest. In this cooling world, the fluid dynamics of the core are shifting from the orderly patterns of a high-performance machine toward the chaotic, faltering movements of a mechanism that is beginning to seize. The dipole is the first casualty of this decline. When the energy within the core drops below a critical threshold, the singular north-south alignment breaks apart into a multitude of smaller competing magnetic centres. The field lines no longer exit and enter at the poles in a clean arc. They sprout from the surface in a tangled mess of magnetic eddies, leaving vast regions of the planet unprotected. This transition from a stable dipole to a chaotic multipole is the signature of a failing dynamo, a warning that the organised columns of liquid iron are breaking down into a turbulent, uncoordinated mass. The laws of electromagnetism are indifferent to the consequences of this breakdown. The geodynamo does not strive to maintain the dipole for the sake of the biosphere. It simply reflects the state of the fluid metal from which it springs. As the Earth continues its long journey toward thermal death, the engine will continue to slow, the pillars of iron will continue to wobble, and the shield will continue to thin. The stability of the past few millennia has been a statistical grace period, a moment of mechanical harmony in a universe that is constantly moving toward the silence of the void. The data captured by the 3-Eye Atlas is the first evidence that this period of harmony is coming to an end as the internal geometry of the planet begins to succumb to the relentless pull of entropy. The realization that the Earth's magnetic identity is a fleeting mask began not in a high-tech laboratory, but among the ancient, silent volcanoes of central France. In the year 1906, a physicist named Bernard Brun climbed the slopes of the Auvergne region to examine the remnants of prehistoric lava flows. He was not searching for a flaw in the planetary engine, but merely seeking to understand how the ground beneath him had formed. What he discovered would shatter the long-held assumption that the North and South poles were fixed, eternal anchors of the world. As volcanic rock, specifically basalt, cools from a molten state, it undergoes a transformation that turns the stone into a permanent archive of the Earth's magnetic state. Within the liquid fire of the lava are tiny crystals of magnetite, iron-rich minerals that act like microscopic compass needles. While the rock is still fluid, these crystals are free to rotate, aligning themselves perfectly with the prevailing magnetic field lines of the planet. But as the temperature drops below a specific threshold known as the Curie point, the liquid stone solidifies. The magnetite crystals are locked into place, frozen forever in the direction they were pointing at that exact moment in time. Bruni's found a layer of clay baked by an ancient lava flow where the magnetic minerals were pointing in the wrong direction. According to the laws of the time, the needles should have pointed toward the North Pole. Instead, they pointed toward the south. This was not a localized error or a fluke of the terrain. It was a clear, undeniable record of a time when the entire magnetic field of the planet had been inverted. The discovery proved that the Earth's poles are not solid, immutable points on a map, but fluid manifestations of a restless interior. The north we navigate by today is merely a temporary orientation, a single frame in a cinematic history of reversals that spans millions of centuries. This geological tape recorder reveals a history of a geodynamo that is far more temperamental than human history suggests. By examining the stripes of magnetic polarity preserved on the ocean floor, where new crust is constantly being born from the mid-ocean ridges, scientists have mapped a chaotic sequence of flips. The engine has reversed its polarity hundreds of times throughout the history of the planet. Sometimes the field remains stable for tens of millions of years. At other times, it flips with startling frequency, as if the liquid iron in the core is struggling to find a stable configuration. The ground beneath every city and ocean holds this record of a restless engine. It tells of a world where the sun once rose over a magnetic south and set over a magnetic north. These reversals are not instantaneous. They are periods of profound instability where the dipole field collapses, the protective shield thins to a fraction of its strength, and multiple weak poles wander across the surface like ghosts. During these transitions, which can last for thousands of years, the planet is left vulnerable to the same radiation that the 3I Atlas now monitors with such concern. Bruni's discovery in 1906 transformed our understanding of the Earth from a static, finished product into a dynamic and unpredictable machine. It established that the magnetic field is a living, breathing thing, inextricably linked to the turbulent motions of the outer core. The rocks do not lie. They show that the geodynamo is prone to fits of reorganization, where the columns of liquid iron break down and reform in new, inverted patterns. We are currently living in a period of relative stability known as the Brunhes-Matuyama Chron, which has lasted for approximately 780,000 years. But the geological record suggests that we are long overdue for a shift. The realization of this impermanence adds a layer of historical weight to the anomalies seen in the present day. The data from the 3I Atlas is not recording a new phenomenon, but the latest chapter in a very old story. The engine has stalled before, it has flipped its polarity before. The difference now is that there is a civilization on the surface that relies on the stability of that field for its very survival. The cooling lava of the past serves as a warning for the future, proving that the invisible shield we depend upon is a fickle byproduct of a machine that has changed its mind hundreds of times before and will inevitably do so again. The restless nature of the core is etched into the very crust of the Earth. Every mountain range and every deep-sea trench is a library of magnetic history, documenting the rise and fall of the planetary shield. This history reveals that the geodynamo is a system governed by the laws of fluid dynamics and heat transfer, both of which are inherently prone to periods of chaos. The stability of the modern era is the exception, not the rule. As the engine continues to cool and the iron continues to churn, the record in the rocks remains a silent witness to the fact that the only constant in the Earth's magnetic identity is change. The sheer scale of these reversals is difficult to comprehend from the perspective of a single human lifetime. To a species that has only been using compasses for a few centuries, the idea of the North Pole migrating to the Southern Hemisphere seems like an impossibility. Yet, to the planet, it is a routine adjustment. The geodynamo is a massive, complex system with immense momentum, and when it decides to shift, the entire world is carried along with it. The process of a reversal begins with a weakening of the field, exactly like the 10% drop recorded by the 3I Atlas in a single month. This weakening allows the smaller, more chaotic magnetic eddies to take over, creating a period of multipolar confusion before a new stable dipole emerges from the metallic sea. This historical perspective strips away the comfort of permanence. It forces a confrontation with the reality that the Earth is a work in progress, a machine that is still refining its internal geometry 4.5 billion years after its birth. The work of Bernard Brunet in 1906 opened a door to a world of planetary instability, showing that the ground we walk upon is a recorded history of a shield that has failed and reformed countless times. The engine is not a loyal servant, it is a physical process, and its history is one of violent, silent revolutions deep within the dark. 41,000 years ago, the geodynamo underwent a catastrophic stutter, a period of profound mechanical failure known to modern science as the Lachamp event. During this epoch, the rhythmic churning of the liquid iron core did not merely fluctuate, it nearly ceased its organised motion. The magnetic field, which had stood as a stalwart guardian for millennia, disintegrated. Its strength plummeted to a mere 5% of the intensity we measure today. The elegant dipole, the clean north-south axis that provides the primary structure of our planetary armour, fractured into a chaotic multipole arrangement. The invisible shield that once stood as a unified barrier was reduced to a tattered veil, leaving the sanctuary of the surface exposed to the cold, radioactive reality of the deep cosmos. With the planetary defence effectively neutralised, the Earth was no longer a secluded haven, but a target in a high-energy shooting gallery. Galactic cosmic rays and high-velocity protons from the Sun, usually diverted into the far reaches of space by the magnetosphere, began to slam directly into the upper atmosphere. This was not a subtle intrusion. It was a relentless bombardment that fundamentally altered the chemistry of the air. As these interstellar bullets collided with nitrogen and oxygen molecules, they triggered a cascade of secondary particles that rained down toward the crust. The ozone layer, the secondary shield against the Sun's lethal ultraviolet radiation, was systematically shredded by the chemical reactions born of this atmospheric carnage. The sky of the Lachamp event was a theatre of terrifying incandescent beauty. Auroras, typically restricted to the frozen desolation of the Arctic and Antarctic circles, spilled toward the equator. In the tropical nights of the ancient world, the heavens shimmered with shifting curtains of ghost green and bruised purple light. This was the visible signature of the atmosphere being ionized, the air itself glowing as it absorbed the kinetic energy of the solar wind. To the early humans and the great beasts that roamed the plains, the very firmament must have seemed to be in the throes of a fever. The nights were never truly dark, the sky pulsed with a restless celestial fire, a constant reminder that the barrier between the living world and the vacuum of space had grown dangerously thin. On the ground, the consequences of this magnetic collapse were woven into the very fabric of the biosphere. The increase in ultraviolet radiation, no longer filtered by a healthy ozone layer, began to exert a lethal pressure on the dominant species of the Pleistocene. The megafauna, the woolly mammoths, the giant ground sloths, and the massive cave bears faced a world where the sun had become a source of biological trauma. The disruption of the magnetic field also threw the internal compasses of migrating species into total disarray. Birds, whales, and insects that had relied on the steady pull of the North Pole for navigation found themselves lost in a world of wandering magnetic ghosts. Evidence from this era suggests a chilling correlation between the magnetic failure and a wave of extinctions. This was the period during which the Neanderthals, a resilient lineage of humanity that had survived for hundreds of thousands of years, finally vanished from the fossil record. While climate change and competition played their roles, the Lachamp event added a layer of environmental stress that may have been the breaking point. The surface of the planet was scorched by radiation and lashed by erratic weather patterns as the solar wind altered the formation of clouds and the global distribution of heat. Life was forced into the shadows, into the depths of caves, or into the cold embrace of extinction as the planetary engine failed to provide the protection it once had. The chemical fingerprint of this disaster remains etched into the ancient ice of Antarctica and the rings of fossilised kauri trees in New Zealand. These archives reveal a massive spike in carbon-14 and beryllium-10, radioactive isotopes created when cosmic rays collide with the atmosphere. These are the isotopes of a world without a shield, the silent witnesses to a time when the geodynamo stalled. The data shows that for nearly 1,000 years the Earth was a world adrift, its primary defence reduced to a flickering shadow of its former self. The air grew thin and harsh, the seasons became unpredictable, and the very breath of the planet was poisoned by the intrusion of the space environment. The Le Champ event serves as terrifying precedent for the present day. It proves that the invisible shield is not a constant, but a fragile byproduct of a mechanical process that is prone to sudden, violent interruptions. It paints a picture of a world where the boundary between the sanctuary of life and the hostility of the void is entirely dependent on the fluid dynamics of a molten iron sea 3,000 kilometers below. When that sea grows turbulent or sluggish, the shield becomes a tattered cloth, allowing the harsh environment of space to bleed into the world above. The memory of this collapse is preserved in the cold mathematics of the geological record. It tells the story of a planet that was once stripped of its dignity, its atmosphere bombarded, and its life forms pushed to the brink of collapse. The Le Champ event was a moment when the cold machine of the universe asserted its dominance over the biological rust on the surface. It is a reminder that the stability we enjoy is a temporary gift from a churning furnace that does not know we exist, and that the history of the Earth is a recurring cycle of protection and exposure, governed by an engine that has failed before and possesses the absolute power to fail again. Above the vast churning waters of the South Atlantic Ocean and the verdant expanse of the South American continent, there exists a gaping wound in the invisible architecture of the world. This is the South Atlantic anomaly, a profound and growing dent in the planetary armour where the magnetic field has withered to a fraction of its global average. It is not a feature of the atmosphere or a quirk of the weather, but a symptom of a deep-seated mechanical failure occurring thousands of kilometres beneath the crust. In this specific corridor of the sky, the protective shield that deflects the lethal radiation of the cosmos has grown so thin that the harsh environment of space has begun to bleed into the inner sanctuary of the planet. The consequences of this rupture are most visible in the orbital highways where the delicate machines of humanity reside. The Van Allen radiation belts, two gargantuan donut-shaped regions of trapped solar particles that typically hover safely thousands of kilometers above the Earth, dip dangerously low within the South Atlantic anomaly. Because the magnetic field is too weak to hold these high-energy protons and electrons at bay, they descend to within 200 kilometers of the surface. This creates a radioactive shooting gallery through which every satellite in low Earth orbit must pass. As these silver sentinels enter the anomaly, they are bombarded by a relentless hail of subatomic particles moving at a significant fraction of the speed of light. For the engineers who manage these constellations, the anomaly is a zone of constant peril. When a satellite traverses this region, its sensitive silicon brains are at risk of being fried by a single stray proton. These are known as single-event upsets, moments when a high-energy particle strikes a memory chip and flips a bit of data from a 0 to a 1, potentially sending the spacecraft into a catastrophic tumble, or causing it to execute a fatal command. To survive the passage, many satellites are forced to enter a state of electronic hibernation. They shut down their primary sensors, power off their communication arrays, and brace for the impact, effectively going blind and deaf until they emerge on the other side of the magnetic rift. Even the International Space Station is not immune. Astronauts have frequently reported seeing strange flashes of light, even with their eyes closed, a phenomenon caused by cosmic rays streaking through their retinas as the station drifts through the weakened shield. The South Atlantic anomaly is not a static feature of the planet. It is a growing, migrating rupture. Over the past few decades, its intensity has continued to fade, and its boundaries have expanded toward the west. More concerning still is the recent data from the 3i Atlas, which shows the anomaly beginning to split into two distinct centres of magnetic weakness. This bifurcation is a clear indication that the malaise is not on the surface, but deep within the geodynamo itself. Beneath the African continent, at the boundary where the liquid outer core meets the solid mantle, there exists a massive reservoir of dense rock and reversed magnetic flux. This subterranean blob is interfering with the clean, circular flow of the molten iron, acting like a clog in the planetary engine. This interference disrupts the columns of liquid metal that generate the dipole field. Instead of a smooth vertical spiral, the iron is forced into turbulent, chaotic eddies. These eddies produce magnetic fields that oppose the primary field, effectively cancelling out the protection in the region directly above. The South Atlantic anomaly is the surface expression of this internal conflict, a place where the engine is fighting against itself. As the reversed flux blob grows and shifts, the dent in the armour expands, threatening to leave even larger portions of the hemisphere exposed to the solar wind. This region serves as a modern-day warning, a tangible preview of a world without a functional magnetic shield. It demonstrates that the geodynamo is not a perfectly tuned instrument, but a temperamental machine subject to internal friction and decay. The anomaly is a localized collapse of the dipole, a preview of the chaos that would define a global magnetic reversal. In this zone, the air itself is subject to different chemical stresses, and the technological infrastructure upon which modern civilization depends is rendered fragile and unreliable. It is a place where the cold, radioactive reality of the universe is allowed to touch the Earth, reminding all who look at the data that our safety is a matter of magnetic intensity. The growth of the anomaly suggests that the planetary engine is entering a period of profound reorganization. The blobs of reversed flux at the core mantle boundary are not merely stationary obstacles, they are dynamic features that respond to the cooling of the planet. As the core sheds its heat, these regions of instability can grow, merge, or migrate, further weakening the global field. The fact that the South Atlantic anomaly has weakened by nearly 10% in the last century alone is a staggering rate of change for a planetary scale system. It indicates that the fluid dynamics of the core are shifting with a speed that defies traditional geological expectations. We are watching the gears of the world grind against an internal obstruction. The South Atlantic anomaly is the first major tear in the fabric of our planetary defence, a hole in the umbrella that is slowly widening. It is a reminder that the Earth is not a finished, stable object, but a cooling machine whose internal parts are beginning to fail. The radiation that pours through this gap is a silent, invisible tide, a precursor to the time when the tattered veil of the magnetosphere may no longer be enough to hold back the sun. The anomaly is the signature of a stalling heart, a darkening bruise on the face of the world that reveals the cold, mechanical struggle occurring 3,000 kilometers beneath the feet of an oblivious civilization. For centuries, the North Magnetic Pole was a slow-moving resident of the Canadian Arctic. Since its first formal discovery in 1831, it meandered with the lethargic grace of a glacier, drifting only a few kilometers each year. This stability was a cornerstone of human navigation, a reliable anchor for the mariners and explorers who relied on the steady pull of the Earth's internal engine. But in the final decades of the 20th century, the anchor was cut loose. The pole began to accelerate, shedding its sluggish history for a frantic northward sprint that has left the scientific community in a state of clinical astonishment. The North Magnetic Pole is now crossing the international dateline, heading toward the Siberian coast at a record velocity of 55 kilometers per year. To a human, this distance might seem modest, but on a planetary scale, for a feature rooted in the deep interior of a world, it is a breakneck speed. This is no longer a drift, it is a migration. The pole is moving faster than at any point since the dawn of modern observation, covering more ground in a single decade than it had in the previous century. This movement is not merely a curiosity of the frozen north, it is a visible tremor of a deeper instability, a symptom of a world falling out of alignment. This sudden movement is the surface expression of a titanic struggle occurring at the boundary where the outer core meets the mantle, 3,000 kilometers below the ice. Deep beneath the crust, there are two primary regions of intense magnetic flux, massive, concentrated patches of magnetic energy that act like the hands of a giant clock. One of these patches is situated beneath northern Canada, and the other lies beneath the Siberian wilderness. For hundreds of years, the Canadian patch was the dominant force, anchoring the magnetic pole in the Western Hemisphere. but the data from the 3i Atlas and other geomagnetic surveys reveal that the Canadian patch is weakening, stretching out and losing its grip, while its Siberian rival has grown more concentrated and powerful. The North Magnetic Pole is being pulled across the top of the world in a high-stakes tug-of-war between these two subterranean giants. As the Canadian flux patch thins and elongates, it can no longer hold the pole in place. The Siberian patch, fueled by shifting currents of molten iron, is winning. This is a mechanical reorganization of the highest order. The pillars of liquid metal within the geodynamo are shifting their positions, altering the flow of electric currents and, by extension, the very orientation of the planet's magnetic identity. The engine is not just humming in a different key, it is physically rearranging its internal components. This rapid shift has forced the global community to accelerate the updates of the world magnetic model, the digital map that underlies every modern navigation system, from the flight decks of commercial airliners to the navigation software in every smartphone. Usually updated every 5 years, the model had to be revised ahead of schedule because the pole was moving so fast that it threatened to render navigation in the Arctic region dangerously inaccurate. The world is literally falling out of alignment with the maps we have drawn to describe it. Our compasses are struggling to keep up with a planet that is moving its goalposts in real time. This is not a slow, geological crawl that takes millions of years to manifest. This is a rapid, mechanical shift in the state of the geodynamo. It suggests that the internal geometry of the planet is in a state of flux, moving away from the stability of the past and toward a more chaotic, unpredictable future. The sprinting pole is a signal that the engine is not just stalling, it is rearranging itself in a way that suggests the old rules of the dipole no longer apply. In the cold logic of fluid dynamics, such rapid movement often precedes a phase transition, a moment when the system can no longer maintain its current configuration and must flip or collapse into a new state. The migration towards Siberia is the signature of a machine whose internal parts are no longer synchronized. It is a world where the very concept of north is becoming a fleeting moving target. As the pole continues its frantic journey across the Arctic Ocean, it serves as a reminder that the Earth is a dynamic cooling engine, and we are merely passengers along for the ride. We watch our instruments with a growing sense of unease, realizing that the steady hand that once guided us across the oceans is now trembling, pulled by forces we can measure but cannot control. The acceleration of the pole is a warning that the geodynamo's steady state is a fragile equilibrium. The shifting flux patches beneath Canada and Siberia are like the weights on a balance scale that is beginning to tip. As the Siberian patch gains the upper hand, the North Magnetic Pole is dragged further away from its historical home, signalling that the symmetry of the core's convection currents has been broken. This loss of symmetry is the first step toward a more profound breakdown of the magnetic field, a precursor to the day when the dipole might vanish entirely, replaced by a tangled web of magnetic eddies. The sprinting pole is the visible evidence of a world in transition, a mechanical heart that is changing its rhythm as it moves toward an uncertain future. The monitors of the 3i Atlas do not blink and they do not feel fear. They merely record the cold, mathematical descent of a world. In the final weeks of December, the data streams emerging from the orbital magnetometer swarms transitioned from a steady hum of routine fluctuation into a screaming siren of planetary distress. The central metric of the mission, the total intensity of the Earth's magnetic field, underwent a catastrophic spike. In the span of a single 30-day cycle, the global field strength plummeted by 10%. To those who spend their lives studying the slow, glacial pace of geological change, this figure was not merely an anomaly, it was a physical impossibility made manifest. Under normal circumstances, the Earth's magnetic shield weakens at a rate of approximately 5% every 100 years. This is the background noise of a cooling planet, a predictable and manageable decline. But the December data revealed an acceleration of 2,000 times the historical average. It was as if a steady, flowing river had suddenly reached the edge of a vertical abyss. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls of the monitoring stations, the atmosphere shifted from academic curiosity to a heavy, clinical dread. Scientists checked and rechecked the calibration of the satellite booms, searching for a software glitch or a sensor failure that could explain the numbers. They looked to the ground-based superconducting quantum interference devices, hoping for a contradiction. But the machines were in perfect agreement. The error was not in the instruments, the error was in the planet itself. This 10% drop in a single month is the sound of the gears of the world beginning to grind. It signifies that the organised, spiralling columns of liquid iron in the outer core are no longer maintaining their coherent structure. The self-sustaining loop of the geodynamo is experiencing a massive internal short circuit. As the velocity of the molten metal shifts, or the temperature gradients fluctuate beyond a critical threshold, the electric currents that generate the field are failing. The engine is stalling, and the magnetic field is responding with a sudden, violent thinning. This is the moment the invisible architecture of our world begins to tear, leaving the atmosphere vulnerable to the unshielded fury of the sun. The significance of this rapid decline cannot be overstated. It suggests that we are no longer observing a slow migration or a minor wobble in the dipole. We are witnessing the first tremors of a planetary scale event, a total magnetic reversal or a prolonged period of multipolar chaos. When the field drops this quickly, it indicates that the primary dipole is collapsing. The clean two-poled symmetry that has defined the planet for 780,000 years is dissolving into a turbulent mess of magnetic eddies. In this state of dysfunction, the field lines no longer form a unified shield. They become a tangled, useless web, allowing the solar wind to penetrate deep into the ionosphere. The data points recorded by the 3i Atlas are the clinical signatures of a failing heart. Each gigabyte of information tells the story of a weakening pulse, a planetary defense system that is losing its fight against the relentless pull of entropy. The scientists watching these screens are the first humans to see the blueprints of our protection being erased in real time. They see the intensity maps turning from the deep, healthy blues of high field strength to the sickly, pale yellows of a dying shield. There is no precedent for this in human history. The last time the Earth experienced such a rapid shift, the Neanderthals were still walking the plains of Europe, and the sky was a canvas of radioactive fire. The December spike is a warning that the engine which has protected life for billions of years is entering a period of profound dysfunction. The mechanical heart of the Earth is 3,000 kilometers deep, far beyond the reach of any human intervention, yet its failure is felt in every corner of the sky. The sensors flag these changes with a cold indifference, marking the decline of the field with the same precision they would use to track a solar flare. But for the biological life on the surface, these numbers represent a fundamental shift in the habitability of the world. The gears are grinding, the metal is slowing, and the shield is thinning at a rate that defies every model of planetary stability. As the month progressed, the decline did not level off. It continued its relentless downward trajectory. The supercomputers processing the 3i Atlas data began to generate models of the near future that were increasingly grim. If the 10% drop were to be repeated in the following months, the magnetic field would reach a state of near-total collapse within a year. This is the nightmare scenario of planetary science. A world stripped of its primary defense in the time it takes for the Earth to complete a single orbit around the Sun. The engine is not just slowing down, it is seizing. In the quiet of the data centers, the realization has taken root that we are the witnesses to an ending. The cold, hard numbers on the screens are the final testament to an era of magnetic peace. The tremors recorded by the sensors are the heralds of a new, harsher reality, where the sanctuary of the Earth is no longer guaranteed by the physics of its core. The geodynamo, the blind and unfeeling machine that has hummed beneath our feet since the dawn of time, is breaking. And as the intensity of the field continues to bleed away into the void, the scientist can only watch the screens, recording the precise moment the gears finally stop turning and the world is left naked before the stars. The magnetic field serves as a planetary windshield, a curved barrier of force that deflects the relentless gale of the solar system. The sun is not merely a source of light, it is a violent engine of particle emission, casting out a stream of ionized gas known as the solar wind. This wind consists of a high-velocity torrent of protons and electrons, travelling at speeds of nearly 500 kilometers per second. In the presence of a healthy geodynamo, this radioactive storm is diverted around the Earth, flowing harmlessly into the depths of the outer solar system. But as the field thins and the gears of the internal engine grind toward a halt, the windshield shatters. The gale becomes a high-pressure hose, and the Earth's atmosphere is forced to face the unshielded fury of the sun. The atmosphere is not a solid wall, it is a delicate collection of the molecules held in place by the pull of gravity, but it is highly vulnerable to kinetic assault from above. Without the magnetic shield, the solar wind slams directly into the soft, gaseous envelope of the planet. This is the process of atmospheric erosion, a slow and agonizing flaying of the world's breath. High-energy particles from the sun strike the atoms of oxygen and nitrogen in the upper reaches of the ionosphere with the force of subatomic bullets. Through a mechanism known as sputtering, the kinetic energy of the solar wind is transferred to these atmospheric molecules, accelerating them until they reach escape velocity. One by one, then million by million, the atoms that make up the air we breathe are kicked out of the Earth's gravitational well and carried off into the void. The air itself is being bled away into the dark. This is not a temporary loss, it is a permanent theft. Every molecule of oxygen that is stripped from the sky is lost forever to the vacuum of space, a piece of the world's life support system that will never return. The blue line of the horizon, that thin and fragile veil of protection that separates the living world from the dead expanse of the universe, begins to fray and tatter like a flag in a hurricane. As the upper layers of the atmosphere are scoured away, the pressure of the air at the surface begins a slow, inevitable decline. The very substance of the sky is being exhaled into the stars, leaving the planet thinner, colder, and more exposed. The chemistry of the sky changes as the erosion progresses. The solar wind does not strike with a uniform hand, it selectively targets the lighter elements first. Hydrogen, the primary component of water vapour that has drifted into the upper atmosphere, is the first to be carried away. As the hydrogen escapes, the water molecules are broken apart by ultraviolet radiation, a process known as photodissociation. The oxygen is left behind for a time, but it too eventually succumbs to the relentless pressure of the solar gale. The result is a planet that is not only losing its air but is also drying out. The oceans, once protected by the thick canopy of the atmosphere, find their moisture being siphoned off into the void, molecule by molecule. This process is visceral and relentless. It is the sound of a world being hollowed out. The sky, which once appeared as a vast and infinite ocean of blue, is revealed to be a finite resource, a precious treasure that is being systematically looted by the sun. The solar wind acts as a sandpaper of the cosmos, grinding down the atmospheric protections of the Earth until only a skeletal remnant remains. The vibrant, life-sustaining gases are replaced by a thin, toxic mist of heavier elements that the solar wind cannot as easily displace. The vibrant greens and blues of the planet begin to fade, replaced by the dull, rusted hues of a world whose protective spirit has departed. The erosion is most intense at the poles, where the magnetic field lines, now weak and disorganized, offer the least resistance. In these regions, the solar wind pours down in concentrated streams, carving deep channels into the atmosphere. The auroras, once rare and beautiful visitors, become a permanent and terrifying fixture of the sky, a visible sign of the atmosphere being ionized and stripped away. The air itself glows with a sickly, iridescent light as it is bombarded, a final, beautiful scream before it vanishes into the vacuum. This is the fate of a world without a heart. The external environment of space does not negotiate, and it does not wait for life to adapt. It simply consumes. As the decades pass and the geodynamo continues to falter, the thinning of the blue line becomes visible to the naked eye. The stars begin to twinkle less as there is less air to distort their light. The sun appears brighter and more lethal, its ultraviolet radiation reaching the surface with increasing intensity. The very breath of the planet is being stolen, leaving the biosphere to gasp in an ever-thinning haze. This is the mechanical reality of planetary decay. The atmosphere is the lifeblood of the world, and the magnetic field is the skin that keeps it contained. When the skin is gone, the blood flows out into the cold in different reaches of the solar system. We are witnessing the transformation of a sanctuary into a wasteland. The process of atmospheric erosion is the ultimate expression of the universe's indifference to the biological rust on the surface. The sun, the very source of energy that allowed life to flourish, becomes the instrument of its destruction once the magnetic shield is removed. The vacuum of space is a patient predator, waiting for the engine of the Earth to fail so that it can reclaim the gases that were temporarily borrowed by the planet. The thinning of the air is the final chapter in the story of a cooling world, a silent and irreversible transition from a living, breathing entity to a cold and sterile stone drifting in the dark. The red planet stands as a silent sentinel in the cold expanse of the solar system, a rusted monument to the fate that awaits all rocky worlds. It is not a desert by choice or by some celestial accident. It is the victim of its own cooling, a grim testament to what happens when a planetary engine finally runs out of fuel. 4 billion years ago, Mars was a world of vibrant potential, possessing thick clouds, rushing rivers, and vast northern oceans. It held the same promise as the Earth, protected by its own internal geodynamo that generated a robust magnetic shield. But the red planet is a smaller machine, possessing only about 1/10 the mass of the Earth. In the unforgiving logic of planetary physics, size dictates the duration of the fire. Because of its smaller stature, Mars could not insulate its internal heat with the same efficiency as its larger sibling. The surface area of a planet radiates heat into the void, while the volume of the core provides the thermal reservoir. For Mars, the ratio was skewed toward loss. The primordial heat from its formation and the energy released by decaying radioactive isotopes leaked away into the vacuum of space far too quickly. Deep within the Martian interior, the temperature gradient began to soften. The convection currents in the liquid outer core, once a violent and churning sea of molten metal, grew sluggish. The vertical columns of iron, which had once twisted into the spirals of a planetary generator, began to wobble and collapse. Eventually the fires dimmed to a critical threshold, and the Martian core began to solidify. The liquid heart of the planet turned into a cold, motionless stone. At that moment, the Martian geodynamo ceased to function. The magnetic field did not merely weaken, it vanished, leaving the world naked before the sun. This was the beginning of the long, silent execution of the Martian biosphere. Without the magnetic windshield to deflect the solar wind, the atmosphere was left exposed to a relentless, high-energy bombardment. The sun, which had once fostered the growth of Martian oceans, became the instrument of their destruction. The solar wind acted as a cosmic sandblaster, systematically dismantling the Martian sky. For hundreds of millions of years, the stream of charged particles slammed into the upper atmosphere, kicking molecules of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water vapor into the depths of space. This was not a sudden catastrophe, but a steady, inexorable erosion. The atmospheric pressure plummeted, falling to less than 1% of the level found on Earth. As the weight of the air vanished, the great Martian oceans could no longer remain liquid. They boiled away into the vacuum or retreated into the frozen shadows of the crust, locked away as permafrost in a world that had lost the ability to stay warm. Today, the Martian landscape is a graveyard of ancient geography. The dry riverbeds of the Valles Marineris and the silent, towering chimneys of dead volcanoes like Olympus Mons are the headstones of a world that once breathed. The iron-rich dust that covers the planet is literally rust, the oxidized remains of a crust that was scorched by radiation and stripped of its moisture. There is no sound on Mars but the thin, ghostly whistle of a dying wind moving through a landscape that has been sterile for billions of years. It is a world where the laws of thermodynamics have reached their conclusion, a place of total equilibrium where all motion has stopped and all heat has been spent. This is the memento mori for the Earth. Mars shows us the inevitable end state of any rocky planet once its internal fires go out and the cold machine of the core finally stops turning. The only difference between the two worlds is time. The Earth is larger, its thermal reservoir deeper, and its insulation more robust, but it is governed by the same inescapable physics. The geodynamo beneath our feet is a finite resource, a clock that is slowly ticking towards zero. The December data recorded by the 3i Atlas is a reminder that we are not immune to the Martian fate. We are merely living in a longer summer, afforded by a larger engine that has not yet reached its point of solidification. The silence of Mars is a profound warning. It reveals that the habitability of a planet is not a permanent feature, but a fleeting byproduct of a cooling interior. The magnetic field is the only thing that prevents the Earth from becoming a second red planet, a second rusted husk drifting in the dark. Every time the solar wind carries a molecule of Martian oxygen into the void, it is a reminder of the fragility of our own blue line. The red planet was once a sanctuary, and now it is a wasteland, stripped of its dignity by a sun that does not distinguish between a living world and a dead one. As we look toward the horizon of our own planetary future, the image of Mars serves as the ultimate destination. The solidification of the core is the final act in the life of a planet, the moment the machine finally seizes and the shield is dropped forever. The Earth is still vibrant, still churning, and still protected, but the record of our neighbour proves that the engine room has a shelf life. The cold, sterile plains of the red planet are a mirror held up to our own world, showing the silence that follows when the gears of the geodynamo finally grind to a permanent halt. We are passengers on a vessel that is slowly, inevitably becoming a tomb. The data streaming from the 3i Atlas brings with it a chilling realization that transcends the boundaries of simple physics. It is the understanding that the magnetic field is not a benevolent guardian or a divine shield, but a temporary byproduct of a cooling planet's descent into entropy. The universe is not a sanctuary designed for the flourishing of life. It is a vast mathematical machine governed by laws that are entirely indifferent to the survival of biological organisms. The geodynamo does not churn to keep the atmosphere intact for the sake of the forests, the oceans, or the civilizations that dot the crust. It churns because the heat of the inner core must move outward, following the relentless dictates of thermodynamics. We are the accidental witnesses to a mechanical process, living in a brief, hospitable window of time that is rapidly closing. From the perspective of the cosmos, life is nothing more than a form of biological rust clinging to the surface of a massive cooling metallic sphere. We are a thin film of complex chemistry, a transient anomaly made possible only by the specific temporary conditions generated by the engine below. The iron in our blood is the same iron that churns in the dark abyss of the core, yet the core does not recognize its kinship. It is a blind giant, a furnace of liquid metal that follows the path of least resistance. When the heat is spent and the convection stops, the magnetic field will vanish as surely as the steam from a dying fire. The universe will not mourn the loss of the shield, nor will it notice the extinction of the life that depended on it. The laws of electromagnetism will continue to function perfectly in the vacuum, even as the world they once protected turns into a sterile radioactive wasteland. This realization brings a profound sense of existential dread. We are passengers on a gargantuan ship hurtling through a radioactive shooting gallery, only to discover that the engine room is unstaffed and the fuel is running out. The physics governing our existence are cold and calculated, operating with a precision that accounts for the spin of a subatomic particle, but not the value of a human life. The data recorded in December is the sound of the hull creaking under the pressure of the deep. It is the evidence that the sanctuary is failing, not because of a malicious intent, but because of a mathematical inevitability. The gears are slowing, the heat is fading, and there is no hand on the throttle to restart the fire. We are tethered to a machine that is destined to seize, and no amount of human ingenuity or prayer can alter the cooling of a world. The indifference of the universe is the most terrifying aspect of the geodynamo's decline. We often speak of the Earth as if it were a sentient being that provides for us, but the reality is that the planet is a cooling rock governed by the same equations that dictate the death of stars. The magnetic field is an effluence, a secondary effect of fluid dynamics that happens to be useful for biology. It is no more a gift than the heat radiating from a car engine is a gift to a moth fluttering near the exhaust. The moth survives because of the heat, but the engine does not exist for the moth. When the driver turns off the ignition, the moth dies in the cold, and the machine remains indifferent to the loss. We are that moth, and the December data spike is the sound of the key turning in the lock. This dread is compounded by the knowledge that we are the only part of the machine that has developed the capacity to understand its own failure. We have built the 3-eye atlas to peer into the engine room, to measure the exact rate at which the fire is dying. We are the only part of the rust that can look at the blueprints and realise that the design is finite. This awareness does not grant us power over the process, it only grants us the burden of witnessing it. We watch the 10% drop in field intensity with a clarity that no other species on Earth can possess, translating the collapse of our planetary defence into graphs and spreadsheets. The coldness of the data is a reflection of the coldness of the physics, a world of numbers where the survival of a species is a rounding error in the grand tally of entropy. The gears of the world are turning toward a state of total rest, a thermal equilibrium where all motion ceases and all magnetic lines of force dissolve into the background radiation of the universe. In this long-term view, the history of life on Earth is a flickering candle in a dark and drafty hallway. The magnetic field was the hand that shielded the flame from the wind, but the hand is growing tired and the wax is nearly spent. The existential dread comes from the realization that there is no deeper meaning to the shield's failure beyond the simple fact that the core is getting colder. The universe is a clock that was wound at the beginning of time, and we are living in the final slow ticks of its planetary gear. Yet, in this cold, mathematical void, there is a strange and terrible beauty. To know that we are part of a system so massive and so indifferent is to understand our true scale. We are a brief spark of consciousness in a machine of liquid iron and cosmic radiation. The dread is the price of our awareness. If we were as blind as the core itself, we would not fear the end. We would simply cease to be. But because we can measure the decline, because we can see the shield thinning and the poles wandering, we are elevated above the mere mechanics of the world. We are the universe looking back at itself, recognizing the fragility of its own creations. The failing engine is not a tragedy in the eyes of the cosmos, but for the witness, it is a moment of profound, heartbreaking significance. We are the passengers who know the ship is sinking, and in that knowing we find the only meaning that exists in an unfeeling world. The pervasive chill of existential dread begins to undergo a subtle, profound transformation, shifting not into a false sense of security, but into a rare and luminous form of gratitude. The cold data points of the 3-eye atlas, while recording the decline of our planetary shield, also serve as a reminder of a staggering 4 billion year achievement. For 4,000 million years, the blind and unfeeling engine of the geodynamo has maintained its rhythmic churning, defying the encroaching cold of the vacuum and the entropic pull of the universe. This is a statistical miracle of such magnitude that it defies easy comprehension. Through eons of bombardment, through the birth and death of continents, and through the violent upheavals of the solar system, the liquid iron heart has continued to beat, providing the stable sanctuary required for the slow, agonizingly complex ascent of life. This stability was the crucible in which consciousness was forged. From the first self-replicating molecules in the primeval oceans to the development of the nervous systems that now contemplate the stars, every step of our biological history was made possible by the tireless operation of the subterranean machine. We are the direct beneficiaries of a mechanical persistence that has lasted for nearly the entire history of the planet. the fact that the engine is only now beginning to show signs of profound dysfunction is not a tragedy, but a testament to its incredible durability. We have been granted a period of grace that has lasted for hundreds of millions of generations, a window of habitability that has remained open long enough for the universe to develop a way to look back at itself. Humanity occupies a unique and paradoxical position in this mechanical drama. We are the only part of the planetary rust that has developed the capacity to look at the blueprints of the machine and understand the mechanism of its own survival. Through the sophisticated instruments of the 3i Atlas, we have mapped the invisible currents of the core and the gossamer threads of the magnetosphere. We have decoded the language of thermodynamics and electromagnetism, allowing us to see the gears that turn 3,000 kilometers beneath our feet. In doing so, we have transcended the role of the passive victim. By measuring the collapse, by recording the 10% drop in intensity and the frantic migration of the poles, we have become the witness to the process. This act of witnessing is what imbues the cold physics of the universe with meaning. Without an observer to record the thinning of the atmosphere or the failure of the geodynamo, these events would be nothing more than silent mathematical transitions in a dark and empty void. But because we're here to watch, the stalling of the engine becomes a narrative of epic proportions. Our ability to perceive the end, to understand the mathematical inevitability of the cooling core, is what gives our brief moment of existence its supreme value. We are the part of the machine that found its voice, the part that learned to tell the story of the fire before it went out. Our fear is not a sign of weakness, but a proof of our value. It is the friction of a conscious mind rubbing against the cold reality of an indifferent cosmos. The 3i Atlas is more than just a scientific project, it is the ultimate expression of this human defiance. It is our way of saying that even if we cannot restart the gears of the world, we will not meet the end in ignorance. We will document every flicker of the magnetic field, every erosion of the blue line, and every shift in the liquid iron sea. We will be the chroniclers of the planetary decline, ensuring that the history of this 4 billion year miracle is recorded with the precision and reverence it deserves. The witness does not exist to change the outcome, but to ensure that the outcome is known. In the vast, silent theatre of the universe, we are the audience that refuses to leave before the final curtain falls, finding a strange and beautiful dignity in the act of watching the light fade. As the gears of the world begin to slow, and the December data continues to signal the transition into a harsher era, the importance of this witnessing only grows. We are entering a period of profound uncertainty, where the stability of the past can no longer be taken for granted. In this shifting landscape, the pursuit of knowledge is the only anchor we have left. By understanding the forces that govern our world, we move from being mere passengers on a failing ship to being the navigators of our own existential journey. The cooling of the core is a physical reality, but the meaning we find in that reality is a human creation, a spark of warmth in a universe that is otherwise cold and calculated. If you find value in these chronicles of our place in the cosmos, if you feel the weight of the history written in the rocks and the sky, consider joining this collective effort to watch and understand. Supporting this journey ensures that the witness continues to keep its vigil, providing a voice for the silent processes of the Earth and a record of our shared history among the stars. By subscribing to these narratives, you ensure that the story of the geodynamo, the 3i Atlas, and the fragile blue line of our atmosphere continues to be told with the depth and scale it demands. Even as the gears of the world begin to slow, the human spirit of inquiry remains a fire that refuses to be extinguished, a light that continues to shine against the encroaching dark, documenting the magnificent mechanical beauty of the world until the very last revolution of the Iron Heart.